Alright everybody, welcome back to another edition of Build Order Tutorials. This time, it's going to be a Protoss build order. And this is a macro build order, but actually incorporates a little bit of an element of cheese, of the typical Protoss stuff, and that is, of course, a Dark Shrine. But don't be confused, this is still a macro build. It just has a bit of an attack, you know, during the expansion, so it's not too boring and defensive and set back. So, as always, there's going to be the audio cover of the build as well as the text cover, whichever one you prefer to go for. So first, start off like a regular build. They're 14 pylon. This is a Nexus first edition of this build. In your own, I guess, you know, watching pro games and whatnot, you might find the Gateway expand or Gateway Cybernetics Core expand. There's different types that actually open with this. That will vary the timings this way and that. With the Nexus first, you're going to rally your 17 supply probe, so your 18th probe, and that'll chime out with the Nexus, so 18 Nexus. Next part of the build is Bing Bang Boom, so 19 Gateway. $20 gas. $21 gas. And a 22 pylon. Put your guys into the gas geysers, 3 each. As your gateway finishes up, starts the zealots and your cybernetics core at 26 supply. This is the emergency zealot in case you have a late scout or didn't scout that they're going for an early attack, so you will cancel it if you don't need it. Put a pylon to the natural. Cancel zealot around this time, if it's safe. And your cybernetics core finishes up, start warpgate, start an adept, and then go for your twilight council as soon as possible, so around 3 minutes or 30 supply. Then go for your mothership core. Put down 2 gateways at the natural of your base. That's why you put the pylon down there. Chrono warp gate after the mothership core pops. Second adept, and you're actually going to be building adepts from this gateway until you have warp gate. When the twilight council finishes, start resonating glaives and chrono that. Get a pylon. From here on out, you should just be aware of not getting supply blocked. At 47 supply or thereabouts, get a robotics facility. Get a dark shrine around 4 minutes. Get your gas geysers, both of them at the natural. Warp gate should be done by now, so go ahead and turn all of your gateways into warp gates. And warp in as many adepts as possible. Should be 3. Get pylons, preferably around your base to check out any overlord drops. Put all your probes into the gas guys of the natural. Get a warp prism, put chrono on that warp prism. and start sending your adepts out. You're going to want to clear the third base. Make sure there's no ling or a group of lings ready to pounce on you there or block your expansion. Keep warping in well, do one more adept warp in at least. And send them across the map. Your attack will start/hit around 5 minutes depending on the size of the map. So as your adepts shade out, get a Nexus at your third, provided that you can. Get a Forge. You should have rallied your Warp Prism to the other base. To your opponent's base, that is. Get an Observer right after, unless you feel comfortable getting an Immortal right after. But an Observer will give you a little bit of extra scouting. Start your Immortal production now. And you will continue that Immortal production. At around 5:40, you're going to warp in DTs with that Warp Prism. You should still have your Adepts alive, ideally, and running around. Start +1 attack, as well as blink, and get 3 extra gateways. Bit of a time gap, around 7 minutes. You're going to get 2 gateways and your gases, both of them at the third base. You've also warped in a couple of sentries at this point, as you have a bit of excess gas. Bit of a gap later here, at 8 minutes, you're going to have your main attack, so you should have been producing Immortals this entire time, and consistently producing from the gateways more Stalkers, and maybe a couple more sentries. But that should be it. Just do your regular macro game after this, and hope that you win. Alright, time to go into the build discussion here. So, strengths. Nexus first gives you strong economic start. If that wasn't obvious, then it should be. This can actually surprise your opponent, even though it's not really a cheese or an all-in, it can still get the surprise factor going on. It leads to a decent macro game as well, so the Nexus first, and then the attack, and then a third base, all leads to a decent macro game. Provides excellent harassment options, so of course you have the Adepts initially, but then you have the Warp Prism plus the option of DTs or Archon harassment. This can snowball, so first the Adepts come in and maybe they don't do that much damage, but they mess up the Zerg player. Then you come with the DTs, then you come in again later on with more Adepts, you know, etc., and you actually have just thrown your Zerg opponent off so much that you snowball to the win. Sometimes, by the way, this insta-wins, so if they do not scout the Dark Shrine, even though it's not the greediest or cheesiest, rather, Dark Shrine, it can still surprise them and actually get a win. This provides decent scouting, although not excellent scouting, as you do have the Adept out in the map and the Warp Prism. It's not the same as having hallucinated Phoenixes run around or real Phoenixes run around, but it's decent. And finally, it can work on most maps. The Nexus first is a little bit tricky part of it, as it will take quite a bit of knowledge and microcontrol to hold a Nexus first, especially on the smaller maps, if your opponent does cheese, but technically this will work on any. Weaknesses. Alright, so Nexus first can lose a cheese, just went over that. So you either have to be really well versed in micro and how it works to defend, or you're just gonna die to it and it sucks. It does depend a little bit on that snowball effect that I mentioned earlier, so in a way that's like really great, right? But also in a way it means that if you don't do any damage to the Adepts, and then you don't do any damage to the DTs, and then you try and do that main push, they may be well prepared for it, and you might get pushed back. Scouting can make doing damage difficult, so that is to say that if they scout the attack incoming with Adepts, which is a fairly common attack, or they scout the Dark Shrine immediately, there's a lot of things they can do to, of course, prepare against this, and it just makes the build a little more difficult to execute and actually get something away from the build. Scouting and map control is not a given. You must control your units correctly. So this is why the difficulty is probably going to be, I would say, maybe a 6 or 7 out of 10. And that is because so much of your map presence is going to depend on you not just, you know, shading into the mineral line and then losing all of your depths and then trying to sack your DTs on like a couple of drones. Like that is not really going to work out super well for you. And you are usually, I would say, even better off playing the safe game with your adepts and DTs and just threatening with the idea of harassment. And lastly, under weaknesses, it's Overlord Speed or Fast Lair Overseer can scout this. So again, going back to the earlier point that scouting can make things a little more difficult for you, there are a couple of, you know, zerg variations that almost ensures they will get the scout. Suggested maps, as I said before, but you actually will see this by far the most on Frost, I would say, and then maybe on Galactic where the third base is a little bit easy to take, but technically any map. The Nexus first variation is very difficult to execute on smaller maps, so of course thinking about Dasan Station, but even Frozen Temple, as it's small and you know where your opponent's spawning, the likelihood of early pools or aggressive pool timings and gas timings is a lot higher on those maps, so you just have to be very wary. Alright, tips and tricks. This is kind of a general Protoss thing to do, so just keep this in mind for any Protoss build. Place pylons around your base in the early to mid game to detect Overlord drops. So priority will go on your mineral lines usually to ensure that you can defend against early lings or lings that just get past you. But then later on, you're going to want to have advanced scouting of these things, and maybe even your mothership core in position can actually take it Overlord down before it gets to you. It's just a good skill to learn. Sorry. Initial adept attack is your only scouting map presence for a while, so do not give them up easily. I already went over this earlier on in the strengths and weaknesses, but just to reiterate, it's, you know, you'll see Neeb do tens, dozens of drone damage and whatnot, and then get out alive. You might not be able to do that, but you want to ensure that they don't feel so comfortable that they just immediately counterattack you and like stop your third base from going down. So I would actually say if you're going to be a newcomer to StarCraft 2 and test out this build, then to go ahead and play very defensive, almost, with your adepts. If your DTs are scouted or are unable to do damage, so the Dark Shrine scouted, or they already have emergency spore crawlers without even scouting, stuff like that, save them. Don't just try and sack them anywhere. Save them with a warp prism and then merge them into archons, and that actually is very effective. They can kill queens, they can kill groups of units, lings or roaches, and they can kill stacked up mineral lines, so they can even do more damage than maybe the DTs would have been able to. And of course, you know, they're fairly easy to save because they have a lot of shields, so you don't just lose them once they're surrounded, and oh well. Archons can also be paired up with the main army, so kind of along the same lines as harassment, and why they're so good with that, they're also just good in the main army. You might even, if you really want to, or you have the minerals and gas combo, make more Archons from the DTs when you do the main attack, because they can be a very powerful thing to have in the front line. Lastly, pay attention to your opponent's composition. Banelings need to be force fielded or split against if you choose your own mass adepts or charge lots. Of course, Roach Hydra will have to, you know, as well as need good force fields to split that army up. But you can go charges against that. Or if they go for like super quick lurkers or something like that, then you might not want to push out unless you're absolutely sure you have detection, for instance. I guess the other option would be like maybe if they were going for fast mutas, then definitely go for blink, I would say. Don't just go mass adepts or charge lots, but just make sure that you're also kind of reacting to what the Zerg player's doing. This is not just a simple cut and dry build and you can follow it to victory. Sometimes you'll be able to, but then sometimes you'll have to make your own decisions. Of course, you don't just have to take my word on how this build is done or what composition the Protoss goes for. You can find a variety of builds. I give you a list here of the ones that I could find, but I'm sure you'll find them in the more pro games you end up watching. Finally, I want to thank you all for watching. Please like and subscribe to the channel, as well as comment down below. If you have any feedback, positive or negative, please be kind, I suppose. If you have any suggestions for builds you would like to see, definitely put this in the comments as well, and if enough people agree upon it or really want to see it, then I will certainly look into kind of bumping that up on the schedule. I know that some people already have, so I think a roach-based ZVT is something that was requested, and I'll certainly look into doing. So don't feel shy, just throw it out there. If you're really curious, if you saw a pro game, you saw something that Neeb did or Beyond did or something like that, put it on the comments and I'll see if I can get a build order up for you guys.